this meeting of the Isle of Wight Council's Audit and Governance Committee being held on that this meeting is being recorded and placed on the council's website, public and others to refer to. For the benefit of that recording, my name is Andrew Garrett. I'm chair of, and I'm joined by other colleagues by name. Also like to welcome Lisa and Stefan Hoberg, Common. That's the German, I'm afraid, but anybody else with more fluent German than I have, with our game, they are Hoberg. Assured them of a very interesting session this morning, so please find interesting. Before I move to the formal agenda, just to remind you about the fire procedure. There are no planned fire drills. So if you do hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route, which is in front of me through those double doors, exiting via the door at the back of the building, across the inner car park to the evacuation pavement opposite the station. The lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency, and in circumstances that we are all outside, please it's safe to do so by a member of staff. Okay, so moving on to the agenda. Apologies and changes in membership. I've been advised of a Choney and Crick. Deputies. Item 2 is the church.
I was vice.
So we elect a vice chairman of annual council.
Oh.
On the agenda.
So it was as a natural consequence. So item 2 is the minutes, which remember most of us been working from maybe from a digital pack. Pages long. Do refer to a page number. To the page number from the pack. So the item before you is to confirm as a true record. Are there any matters of accuracy? As I shall. Seconding, so I'll take a vote. Thank you. Item 3 is to make any declarations of interest. Of course, if you come across it later in the meeting. Councillor Garner.
Mr. Chair, two declarations. First, both non 26 as chairman of the fund. Second one is paper or they're on the election.
Thank you. The other members wish.
Vice chairman. Sit on the go.
I think both of those. It's good to have those like I said, it comes to your notice by just. Okay. So, come to the point of an election of a vice chairman, as has just been discussed. Council committees to elect as I have any other work when you I know it's always difficult. Sorry? But certainly I would have in mind nominate election for chair. So well, that's very kind of you, Councillor. I was going to note, Councillor, Vice Chairman of the full council. Torch to be passed on, so that's very kind of Councillor Burke being seconded graciously signing the nomination. But first of all, thank you. You're in a bit, isn't it? Yeah. So I'll put that to the vote. Vice Chairman of Churchman for having fulfilled. So item 5 is the public question time, for which we have 15 minutes. And there is no one gallery. On to item 6, which of the external auditor. We have here Jason Jones and Kevin Suter. Done. Invite you to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, so we have our planning report financial year. I'll hand over to Mr. Introduction is the process being introduced. Housing community. The backlog in debt. We'd like to make general election. That will be put content of statutory date. On that, hand over to Mr. Highlights of the.
Thank you, Kevin. Chair, I'll start off page 6, risks and the areas. First one we have is the risk. This risk is stated by the standards and the related. Also, we haven't identified a specific risk for the council. We standardly and with the and that's only management being financial. As that is. Then the next one down is risk of revenue recognition. Again, per the auditing standards, risk is a presumed risk of put in revenue recognition, and in local government in public sector context, that's extended expenditure as well, because local authorities are profit-driven, expenditure-driven. So for council, we think this risk is most likely to capitalization of it. That's where expenditure that's not of a capital nature processed through instead of being processed the from an expenditure statement that's capitalized, which then reflect on the fund. So we would that as next one down here is the PFI accounting. So the accounting model has changed between, and in previous years, we were able to bring forward assurances that we had in previously looked at the accounting model 13 or 2014 was introduced, and we had a specialist look at it at that point in time. And since it hasn't changed, yes, we were able to roll forward that assurance up to now, but now that it's changed, we'll have an accounting model. Recognize that as this accounting. The next one down here is valuation of the net pension liability, which now is potentially an asset position. At the time of writing our report, council had not yet revised 90. But since then, actually has submitted the and while there is potentially a net asset position, there is the restrictions what you can recognize for asset ceiling. So our last discussions with the council, we have commissioned an addition actually, and that will be taken into account. Statement of account. Council is still valuation thereof is in a complex, so we as that as a risk. Even without the asset ceiling calculation, number of assumptions, estimates involved. Risk and pension special. On the next two relates to property valuation, so that's investment property and operational land and building. Both are material balances in the accounts and subject to valuation techniques and valuation assumptions. So as with pensions, the assumptions, any changes in the assumptions change because of the significance of the number. We have downgraded the risk from significant high inherent risk for previous years as those as because valuer time property calculations and the factors, but the set it for a number is now the valuer evaluation downgraded that risk high inherent. Yeah, I'll pause there on the risk section before questions.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a number of questions on this. Take them in sec.
I don't have much longer to go, so at the end. If you can then just move to page 18 of the pack. In our approach to materiality. So planning materiality has been set at 8.8 million. That's based on 2% of the prior year's gross expenditure revenue, gross revenue expenditure, and that will be updated once we receive the draft accounts. Performance materiality, we have set that at 75% of planning materiality. And for performance materiality, we set it at either 75% or 50%, based on the level of errors we expect in the accounts. If we expect a higher level of errors, we set materiality at 50%. Then drives our sample sizes, so we test more. However, with our experience with the council is don't expect a high level of error, so we set our performance materiality at 75. And that will then lower the amount of samples that. Then we have an audit differences threshold of 442K. That's a level of error that we report. Anything below that level, don't report unless we think it warrants the attention of. Just quickly skipping to section 2 here on page 23, we just list there the detailed procedures that we undertake, all of the audit risk and the areas of focus, procedures that we will perform those risks. And then on section 3, page 30, is our value for money assessment. At the time of drafting our report, we not yet fully completed our planning procedures, but we have since completed those procedures and we've not identified any risks of significant value for money in terms of the 3 reporting criteria. We'll keep this under review and audit. We'll update our work to determine whether there are any changes to our, but at this point in time, we've not identified risks of significant. That's all I was going to say, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for that. Councillor Garment's indicated it's good.
Yeah, so I'll start at the top. Starting with page 14, you notice that you're going to disclaim the reports. Is that solely on the basis of the changes in the regulatory issues?
Yes, that's correct. That's solely on the basis of the changes in specific Isle of Wight. But we have to clear that backlog. Council.
So the next one's on page 15. And I wanted to know whether your examination here would, in terms of on the accounts, would include contingent liabilities. The reason I ask that is that we do have reasonable foresight and a reasonable expectation that will be transferred to the Isle of Wight Council following changes in the school place planning. I think we've all been aware of this for some years. The of it has been widely discussed. We do have a breakdown of what the debt elements are per school now obtained. And of course, with the departure of both Carisbrooke and Medina to new trust, a sizable chunk of the credit balance transfer to outside of the council's control. The question is, will the examination include issues related to contingent liability and the fairness with which those accounts? Need to know on that one. Right, page 16, you refer to a significant change in the PFI accounting model. Not aware of what that significant change is, and I think it helped to, rather than just describing it as a significant change, some indication of what, because yeah, as you said, it's been stable using the same model for quite a long time, decade or more.
Actually, until we management and therefore obviously we will find out. At the moment we don't. So that
supplementary on that particular point. Do you know if the change has been instigated by the council or by a contractor or by some statute or at all? Just a general knowledge that the model's been changed, financial model.
council.
think that finished. So the next one is on page 18. In terms of materiality, you've set the figure of reporting for just under £500,000. My concern is that given the financial status of the accounts and our funding arrangement, rosy, I wonder whether such a high figure is appropriate. There are material variances. Would it not be applicable, given that fragility, that figure? For example, all material issues in excess of 50,000 rather than £500,000. £500,000 is a very large chunk of our budget.
Our material. For all. These that we. So if do so, caveat that we are happy numbers as presented. Efficient accounts standards.
My concern here, given that we're dealing with uncorrected misstatements, £500,000 is a lot of money, and to hear that it would be a lot of extra work, that would imply that there were of misstatements in the range 50,000 to £500,000. Concerning by itself. Whether you want to comment on consideration.
I'm noting, though, that though it discusses a figure on that, that's further sentence identified. Presumably, to find a misstatement, check everything. And law design.
It's actually going to they would be able to ask fact that
thresholds, and it involves guarantee. So yeah, if you want thresholds, that establish what. As I say, if the
only thing I've done, whether you were perhaps if as and when statement, irrespective of the value and Councillor Jarman, it's not if
I think that's kind of comes back to what I was saying about that further sentence underneath that block, which is other misstatements that are part of your testing. If you, what I think I would take is that from an internal audit, purpose of some extent is to make sure that we have confidence internally our procedure present a high risk of. But whilst our external auditors are going through quite natural process that they must go through and set a threshold, seem to have been comfortable with previous through. Yeah. I'm disinclined to push for more work which places financial strain on this authority. Councillor Jarman and that.
I'd be happy to take a suggestion that that anything which is discovered.
So I need to be clear, I can't do that at additional cost. The way our testing works, for example, find an error, it essentially decides, let's say extrapolate to the population. So you set that threshold, extrapolated approach, we set the population or not. So if you set a lower threshold, audit cannot guarantee additional work. Can't quantify because counts. So you know, I'm quite cannot give a guarantee.
How understanding that then? Where does this second sentence other misstatements?
So if potentially we found a 2030 the cause of it inappropriate behaviour, even though we wouldn't have material threshold, we that sort of tension because that would be the so whatever we find, errors do happen. Some people make value below that threshold. If we thought it was deliberate, we. But that's the sort of final.
Ignorance and in internal vehicle buying that should have the external audit into
controls in and family sit with internal audit. Both parties. The assessment of the Garrett was talking. Both in terms
Councillor Jarman?
On this one there for a while. I had assumed that that second paragraph would indicate that the committee would be made issues that were covered and that was part and parcel of the normal process. Would not be an additional cost. Would I be correct in summarising what said, that if there is something below that £500,000 roughly figure, but at the moment, if it was, bring it to the committee, but if it was not a fraud, some other gross error, because that's a big error on most people's account, you would not bring it to the committee. Is that correct?
Broadly speaking, yes.
That's very worrying. That means we could have £300,000–400,000 material errors that this committee would never be aware of.
Yes, that's correct. We have to set a threshold to be able to work. Can't audit everything, and we don't. If it would take as long for us to do that audit as it would take for the council to put through all its thousands of transactions per year. So that, I mean, that's the concept of materiality. It is essentially a margin for error. That the accounts are reasonable, they are fair, and they, to the reader, will present a good enough view of the council's transactions, to put it as colloquially as I can. So, as I said, if you want a lower threshold, we can report a lower threshold, but it may cost more money. And I can't put a number on it, I'm afraid, until we actually get into that work. We'd be happy to do so. It will be the committee's decision.
Can I ask what might be a bit of a dippy question? Could I just ask, Kevin, if during normal testing you identified something that you thought may be inaccurate, but you weren't going to take it further, is that not generally flagged to finance colleagues, though, that if they so wish to look at it further?
Generally, yes, but there are some items that we don't. So going back to what I said, in terms of sampling, if we sampled small value items, there was an error of a few pounds in a representative sample, and our testing strategy would be to extrapolate that one through. If it was a few thousand, 20, 30, 40, we wouldn't necessarily report that to finance colleagues either, because we do understand that, a few pounds here and there, which may be rounding, it may be, the invoice from the supplier has changed in terms of the original purchase order. We don't tend to flag everything because there's no need to. There is necessarily no problem for the council. If there are other errors of another nature, somebody's miscoded something, somebody's entered the wrong figure, yes, we would probably bring that to the council's attention, especially where the council could be due money back, recognising, the impact upon the public purse. So it's very much a judgmental aspect that we undertake. And that's why we have to have, some level of threshold to do so, because otherwise we would just be here forever undertaking that audit, and we can't do that. So, to summarise, it's judgmental. If there are numbers that come through, it depends upon the nature of the issue that's caused them, nature of the issue arising and underpinning things. So that's the level of that's the level of assurance we always give across all our clients. I keep saying, if the committee wants a lower number, we can do so, but we would have to work out the cost implication as we went along.
Thank you for that. I'm going back to what it says in there and in the brackets relating to the primary statement. So those headings they're big number headings, aren't they? So you're looking at something which actually is a small percentage of a big number. Am I right in thinking that? Second, I come down to, we have an internal audit function that provides our secondary, a second line of assurance on how things are done. When we have a whole finance team and every member of staff who deals with finances who is trained to do things right, mistakes will happen. Audit is not, though, to come along and just completely do the accounts again, is it? It's not to take all those figures and have somebody beaver away with the receipts and everything, re-entering in and then seeing if somebody's miscoded something somewhere along the way. But you are alive to the things that would concern us most, which is the loss of money out of this authority through, for example, as you said, fraud or whatever. So I presume we could informally ask you for a ballpark figure on what it might cost us, but I think it would be difficult for this committee at the moment, given we're bound by the council's overall budget envelope to sort of authorise you to go to a lower level. In the previous years, we've been content with that. So, have we the reason to believe that there would be anything to be gained materially by going to a lower amount? But that's where I'm coming from. I don't think there is anything materially to be gained, given the other functions of the council and the officers in terms of internal audit and financial controls generally. So, but I am just one member of this committee. Colleagues, any thoughts? Councillor Jarman.
I feel more concerned now than when I asked the first question. I'm trying to work out why I feel that way. I do, because I deal a lot of my life in numbers, and I quite like numbers. Yes, I find the threshold very high. That was the trigger point, and many of our accounts are quite fragile, so that was the trigger for it. The issue that things might well be discovered and not reported below that £500,000 to this committee, simply because they weren't fraud, I find an aggravation to my concern. The fact that there might be a rounding error of £20,000 to £30,000 on an invoice from a supplier that would not be raised with finance, I would find an aggravation. I'm sure any of us who've been involved in business, to have a rounding error of 20 to 30,000, just to pick your words, on an invoice would immediately see red flags. I don't know what the cost of a bag of flour is these days, but I'm sure anything of that magnitude would raise some concerns. I don't want to take up a huge amount of time with the committee debating this, but it does seem to be we're sort of discovering things that we were previously unaware of. And perhaps what's better is to take this and have a separate discussion on the topic, at which we can discover more, because I could carry this line of questioning on rather unproductively in this forum. And through that, perhaps we could discover clarification as to the interpretation of that second sentence in the document at the moment, and some indication of what the costs involved would be to do the work at a lower threshold, without necessarily at the moment defining what that threshold would be. Would that be a good way forwards?
I think so. I think it's getting to the heart of actually the training of members here, actually our understanding of what is the purpose of internal audit, external audit, all the other financial controls that we have in place. We are guardians of public money. There comes a point where it becomes inefficient with that money to keep spending it, checking that it's being spent. In the end, we just spend all the money checking that we're spending all the money that we're checking, and we just go around in a spiral then and not actually do anything. So, and I take it that this is no real difference, this threshold percentage wise, from any other authority that you might be dealing with. So it feels, and I'm with Councillor Jarman in the sense of big numbers like this, below which you kind of go, okay. But having friends who similarly have been chief auditors and whatever of major FTSE companies, they kind of like, yeah, but it's so tiny that in terms of what we're doing as our job, our function to gain assurance around things, actually it would be the wrong thing for them to do. So I think maybe something that's a discussion, strict training or whatever. Is that where you're going on this, Councillor Jarman, do you think?
Yes, if you're happy, Chair, I'll gladly speak to the people involved and arrange a separate session on this topic for those who'd like to attend.
Informal.
And it may be that there are others outside of this committee who would like to attend that discussion as well. There shouldn't be any restriction on that discussion anyway. But I think it would not be productive to carry it on unduly here.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Souter, yeah.
Just to check a couple of items there. You asked if would the percentage be any different to anybody else? No, that is EY's methodology. So it's the threshold is always 5% of the planning materiality. So that is our standard methodology that we use. So it's consistent. To Councillor Jarman's point, if it was 20 to 30,000 of one invoice, yes, we would absolutely flag it. What I'm talking about is extrapolations of smaller items, so, you know, £2, £3, £4 on invoices that have to be extrapolated up through our sampling methodology. 20 to 30,000 pounds on one invoice, yeah, absolutely, I would be telling management or asking the team to. That's, you know, significant money that the council could get back. So we would definitely be asking or telling management if we found that on one invoice.
Not to labour this, but do I understand that? So if you saw a sum of money and then you said there must be this number of transactions and various bits of black box mathematics, this would multiply up to a sum of money. That's what we're getting at. So individual small sums multiplied up by the potential across all those other things. I think I've got a clear. Thank you, Councillor Jarman. I think you've actually this discussion has certainly opened my eyes to a couple of other things, but I think we've got a way forward on that, and we'll probably start with our internal audit colleagues to help us with that before we engage you and your fee structure on some training side of things. So, Councillor Jarman, any other questions?
Yes, so could I ask that when the material change in the PFI accounting model is learned, that it's disclosed to this committee without waiting for the next committee meeting?
So if I could suggest then, if you wanted a question on that as soon as possible, the best route to do that would be to ask management, because they will know the background before our audit.
In fact, is there anybody in the room or online who can help us in that respect already?
So the accounting model substantially hasn't changed massively. The change in the gathering of the information is as a result of the savings exercise over the last couple of years. So how the numbers are presented doesn't change in the accounts. It's just building in those saving assumptions that have been worked up over the last couple of years. Yeah, broken down in the same table of liability over the coming years. It's just the original numbers were quite locked because it was quite a fixed agreement. And because of those changes, we would have to represent them. The profiling changes over coming years, yes.
Thank you. So next question, with your leave, Chair, is on page 28, where you talk about the valuation of land and buildings. Does that include Isle of Wight Council land and buildings on the Isle of Wight? The emphasis seemed to be much about the mainland investments.
So on page 28, so property, plant and equipment, so that's your operational assets. So the assumption would be that all those assets are for operations of the council, so that would be on the Isle of Wight. On page 27, sorry, hold on, I'm just trying to get it right. Yes, 27, when we talk about investment properties, so if you have assets off of the Isle of Wight, that would capture those there.
So both Isle of Wight assets and mainland assets would be included?
Yes. Okay.
And then the next question is regarding the accounts. There was a discussion about the monthly management accounts and their publication some time ago, but I don't believe we've actually seen them circulated for quite some time. And I wondered whether those accounts were part of the audit process or whether you even had access to them. Maybe an internal one or perhaps more than an external one. I don't know where to address the question, Elizabeth. I'm looking at you both. Fingers pointing here.
So from an external audit point of view, no, they are not subject to the audit. They are management's accounts for the year as you go through. We are interested in the statutory ones that have to be published at the end of the year. So we are not auditing them. But yes, we do have access to them. So if we wanted to, we could ask for them from officers through the year to understand the finances as they've gone through.
And almost there, Chair. You mentioned there was a ceiling on the recognition of value from the pension fund. So the pension fund had a gross gain on its investments in excess of 90 million this year. What is the ceiling and what impact does that have on the accounts?
So under the accounting standards, if the net asset is to be presented on the balance sheet, the actuary has to do a calculation to see whether that should be restricted. So that's under the accounting standards. So as we understand at the moment, the actuary has gone through that process. He has identified that there is a restriction that has to cap the amount of that ceiling. And that's what we need to be auditing to make sure that has been calculated properly. So it doesn't have a direct relationship to how the pension fund as a whole has performed, because it's done on a different accounting and a different accounting basis. That's probably the best I can describe it at this point in time without actually having undertaken the audit yet and unpicked the numbers. The difference is, you know, for when we audit the pension fund, we're auditing the numbers as presented. So, you know, what is the value of the asset, the 90 million gain as you've described. When we're auditing the council's accounts, what we're looking at is the extent of liabilities. You know, how much are you likely to have to pay out in pensions over time? So we are looking at two different but linked aspects.
So it's very liability.
Very complex area, which is why we put a risk against it, because we need specialists to help us. You know, we're accountants. We need our actuarial colleagues to try and help and say, is this number right?
And Chair, the last question I had was a more general one, really. As I was reading through the report, I noticed the regulatory changes, you know, the ISA 315 and IFRS 16 things. I had to look up those issues to actually understand the context in which they were being used. And it brought to my mind something which is ongoing, which is a councillor development programme that we have anyway, which quite a number of officers also join in. I think it's actually chaired by Councillor Ward from memory, which we have quite regularly, these training and educational briefing sessions. And I wondered whether it might be appropriate to add to that training regime issues relating to audit. Not that we want to enable every councillor to become an auditor, but so that they can understand the regulatory construct in which their matters are being referred. And I don't think there's very much at all in the current training programme about audit. I did try and find out, I didn't find very much.
We did engage the LGA, I think 2 years ago, Councillor Garrett, if you recall, and we did a training exercise in here with them. So it might be useful to repeat that and invite more people. They came and actually explained the whole process of the Audit and Governance Committee and their role and responsibilities. We could tie some of that in with it.
Certainly, although my recollection, there was somewhat minimal engagement from members with that exercise. But looking ahead, of course, 2025, we do have local elections. There will be an induction programme for new and indeed existing councillors. So I think that could be very helpful, particularly also with our previous discussion in mind as well. Councillor Quirk.
Reading through the audit approach and triggered a thought, and that was when we were looking at the value for money. And this probably falls somewhere between internal and external audits, but in terms of value for money, one bit that we find very difficult to track as members is the money that is comes in terms of selling off land to developers, because this is always said this is confidential because of the negotiations, and whilst I see that during the negotiations, I don't actually see why it has to remain confidential afterwards, but it always does. So someone somewhere needs to be looking to see whether we are getting value for money from the sale of land, and where do we pick that up, and particularly because if you're going to do something a little bit dodgy, and I'm not suggesting anyone is, but if you were going to, this is a very easy way to be having stuff that is no one's getting to see what's happening. And I think it's important that someone is actually looking to see the value for money is actually occurring. Where does it happen? Does it happen?
So in terms of our responsibilities for the statement of accounts, when there are material disposals, we would audit those as part of the audit. So that would be a significant figure, a significant transaction that we would be likely to pick and to ensure that the right process has happened underneath it to give the right value. If you had a significant program of disposals, we would also potentially look at that as part of our value for money responsibilities, just to understand it. And in particular, if you had very significant large numbers, there are legislation thresholds that we would be expecting arrangements to be in place for. So we would probably look at those for our value for money responsibilities as well. But that's not to say we look at everything every year. So, you know, hopefully in terms of our responsibilities for materiality, we will pick up the significant transactions through the year through your accounts. But we won't necessarily look at everything, and we won't look at all of the transactions.
Councillor, we periodically do audits in that area. In actual fact, in the progress report, there's follow-up on assets disposals. So we would have looked at a sample of the assets that were disposed of. So on a 3-year cycle, we will pick a sample to have a look at. So that will complement any work as well to which external audit do, but it's contained within the report I'm due to present.
Can I have a follow-up there? So, sometimes when you're disposing of assets, a housing association will say, give us the land and we'll build houses and you get the benefit. That has happened in the past. I'm sure it probably still happened, but we don't know because it's all kept secret at present. That only works if the reciprocity of it is that you are taking people off of our housing list and taking people out of needing subsidy to be put into housing by the council. How do we look at that value for money?
So my initial response, councillor, would be to say you can ask management. So as the councillor, you can engage with management to provide you with the information to understand the transaction. Now, as you mentioned, you know, during those negotiations, there may be confidential aspects that would indicate that potentially they can't talk you through all of the detail at that point in time. But I don't see any reason, I can obviously be corrected by management, that once a transaction has been agreed and negotiated, if those commercial confidences are over, there's no reason they can't take you through
that. Justin, do you agree with that?
So just winding back just briefly, the council has a statutory duty to achieve best consideration. Best consideration in law is monetary, not necessarily about social value or added benefit. The Secretary of State has granted an exemption where you can accept less money, where certain conditions are met, such as the transaction not being for land that would otherwise be worth 2 million or more. And there's a couple of other conditions, and then you can accept less where there are such things as socio-economic value, and those will be outlined in the decision report. That decision report may, and I don't know whether you can hear me well, I'm struggling to hear people from the other side of the room. That report would outline either that the decision maker, Cabinet, are satisfied that they are achieving best consideration, or that report would outline why they're departing from that, using potentially the exemption. That report may, at the time, have had confidential information within it, and I know the authors have been working to ensure that only the minimum amount of information is now kept confidential in a separate appendix. The reason for that may be time limited. It may be that it's exempt at the time because it would prejudice the commercial negotiations. If that was the reason for the exemption, then once those commercial negotiations have ended, by its very nature, that exemption should no longer apply. And at some point, that figure will simply appear at land registry as well, in terms of the land sale. So yes, I agree broadly. The only reason I did a bit of a more long-winded answer is there may have been another reason for the information being exempt.
Did that make sense to you, councillor Quirk?
Yeah, because that suggests that our current practice is actually a bit too secretive, because Justin agrees with it.
Councillor Churchman.
Could I backtrack a moment, please? On page 25 of the council's, I think it's page 15 of your report. I meant to raise this earlier, the PFI contract. I would like to know the feasibility of moving the PFI contract, the whole working thing, into our half-empty council offices. And I understand all the logistical problems of parking, moving equipment, but we've still got approximately 12 years to run on the PFI contract. Even if it took 2 years to merge them into this council, we'd save 10 years of land, everything else. And the other reason I mention it, when the contract was awarded to the Isle of Wight, one was also awarded to Hounslow at the same time. Hounslow run the whole lot for one central council building. And that means there is much more continuity between officers, councillors, etc. So I really seriously think we should consider possibly doing it. I mean, I know they'll hate it because they've got a lovely building up there, but that's not the point. We're talking about pounds, shillings and pence. Thank you.
I think that's out with the scope of external audit, but I'm sure colleagues otherwise within the council have taken that point on, councillor Churchman. I think that's something maybe you want to pursue through forthcoming budget process as something to be explored. But yeah, an interesting point.
I just wondered because it was on, as I said, they talk about looking at the model. Thank you.
Yeah. But definitely, I'm sure I'm right. It is up with your,
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
scope. Yeah. Any other questions, colleagues, to Mr. Souter and Mr. Jones on that or comments? Otherwise, I would just highlight, I think it is on page 34 of the pack. A request is made of us. Yes, that we perhaps we may not be able to quite accede to this request given our discussions earlier, but the understanding of an agreement to these materiality and reporting levels. I think given the discussion we had earlier and general acquiescence to what Councillor Jarman was saying is that we do to a certain degree understand those materiality levels and give agreement to those, but of course that we will be looking at other ways of exploring what that means. I hope I haven't misrepresented the general view of the committee. A wry smile there, Councillor Jarman, but in the spirit of what is required from us today, colleagues, do you feel you can accede to that request? In which case, I'm going to take a formal vote from it, so you will have the comfort of a formal vote on that we've confirmed our understanding and agreement to. So I'm going to propose that from the chair. Those in favour of doing so? Anyone against or abstaining? That we've agreed to that, so you have that comfort that we've paid attention to that part of your report, as we have done quite comprehensively, I think, particularly through Councillor Jarman. Have I covered everything that we need to do on your report, do you feel, or is there anything else you would need from us?
There is nothing else we need from you at this stage. We will happily crack on with the audits as planned, and we will be coming back to you in future committee meetings. And yeah, happy to have a separate discussion if the members feel it necessary on the materiality levels.
Thank you for that, in which case I'll move on to the reports plural of the Chief Internal Auditor. Do you want to take them separately, I guess? So we're looking at pages 65 onwards in the pack for the first report.
Thank you, Chair. The first report that you have in front of you is the progress report. So it narrates.
Actually, because of the sound quality, could you move your mic? They're quite directional, and certainly I'm having a bit of a hearing difficulty today.
So it narrates any of the audits that we haven't reported since the last reporting period, and it very nearly mops up the entire audit plan bar 2 reviews, which we will bring to the committee in September. There has been some movement within the plan, which is detailed at the latter stages of the first report that you have in front of you. There are also, though, attached to the progress report 3 audit reviews where there are limited assurance, and it has been agreed that we will bring along the entire report. Briefly, the 3 reports that you have in front of you as the appendices, one is in relation to key controls, financial controls for some of the operations within children's services. We have a homelessness review that we've performed, and we have direct contact and supervision, which is again in the children's services. Whilst they are rated as limited assurance and there are some high risk contained within, there were examples within all of them of good practice and good control arrangements, but there were some underlying issues. So in the 2 children's service areas, the 2 underlying issues were predominantly in relation to the financial controls, the transparency of some of the financial controls, and challenge in and around whether those particular levels in some examples were value for money or prudent for the use of public purse. Saying that, the expenditure in the scheme of expenditure for the authority is actually low. It's just that there were a number of issues that were highlighted. On the homelessness side, again, whilst it's rated as limited, that's predominantly because our testing, and we would have tested a sample, but if we have a failure rate within that sample that is above 10%, then that may contribute to a high risk. And we found some issues adhering to some of the timescales, which were aligned to process, and obviously that the strategy is yet to be formally approved, but it is in draft. Both directors from the 2 areas are here. There are action plans in place, and both of the action plans, or all 3 action plans for the 2 areas, have already been enacted. Beyond that, Chair, for the progress report, it will also include any of the other work and follow-up work that we've performed. I will pause for any questions on the progress report at this stage.
I think it would be helpful actually if Mr. Whitaker and Ms. Gordian could comment on the delivery so far on their action plans, if you might.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Whitaker has very graciously asked me to go first, so I'm incredibly grateful. In relation to the homelessness report, there is no comment to make in terms of the finding. They are fully accepted by the department. We're grateful to our colleagues in internal audit for working with us to help us identify core areas for development and learning across the service. We have consistently seen pressures in terms of timescales linked to homelessness, and that assists us in perhaps upping our game is the right phrase. It's incredibly important that when households are faced with these situations, we respond in a timely way, and that's been our core learning as a result of the audit that we've been able to share in with our internal audit colleagues. The action plan is in place, the actions are underway, the strategy is in development, in draft. There are some tweaks that are being made before it's to be approved, and we have a full refresh of our housing strategy coming in 2025. So that will also be linked to this key area of work. I hope that that assists you, and I'm very happy to take any specific questions if that would be useful to the committee.
If I take Mr. Whitaker next, and then we'll open up for questions around that area.
Thank you, Chair. I'll echo some of the words that Laura's just spoken around how useful this process has been for myself and also a number of my colleagues who are new to the Isle of Wight Council. So members will be aware that a lot of the findings of this audit related to practices and processes from when children's services were being led by our colleagues at Hampshire County Council, and that partnership came to an end at the end of January. And so I became the new Director of Children's Services on the 1st of February, as did senior colleagues within the Education Inclusion Access side, and then the Service Director for Children's Social Care, which relates specifically to these two areas, who joined on the 18th of March. So for us new to the island, new to the council, really, really helpful to have these insights and this detailed look at some of the working practices within the Directorate. I guess the wider context is there's very significant change going on within children's services, lots of new processes, new systems. And so in addition to the action plans that we have in place, we're also looking at this in the wider contexts of developing new systems and processes and integrating children's services more fully within the wider council framework, whereas previously it was to a certain extent positioned outside. So that's all I think I was going to say at this point, but just thank you again for the timeliness of this report is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions at this stage? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I was a bit shattered. Page 96, we talk about donations, what's donations? Cash donations. I know the action required to be paid into a budget code, etc. Page 97, spent £1,555 on team days and staff catering. Page 99, gifts for staff must not be procured from council funds, flowers and vouchers. I was quite shattered to read some of this. I'm not sure what my constituents would think about their council tax paying out things like this, but I appreciate what you've said. You are new to the job, and I'm quite happy that you will, in fact, cut down on these things and have proper systems in place. But I just needed to make the point that it looks to me as though a fair bit of money, it might be small sums, but at the end of the day, it all accrues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, any other comments, questions at this stage? Councillor Jarman.
Sorry, I'll start again. So on page 77, we're talking about budget savings proposals. And I'm referring to the 10% figure that Elizabeth used earlier for effectively an intervention point. So on this one, 5 were selected for review. One of them is not going to be achieved at all, which was a £75,000 saving. And one is going to have a shortfall on it. So we've got there what could easily be read as a 40% failure rate, a little bit of maths. And surely that's above the 10%, and yet that item gets an assurance rating, surprisingly, despite the fact it's got a 20% failure and a 20% partial failure.
Councillor, the review to do with budget savings and proposals, they are exactly that. It is a proposal to make that saving. So whilst there is an expectation and there should be robust calculations and assumptions made behind it, whatever the saving is that is being proposed, there are occasions where something of that nature actually cannot be achieved. It may have been predicated on a business case, and when the business case was undertaken, that was no longer achievable. When I use the narrative that if we have a 10% failure rate, you are right because you've picked up the budget and in the other one, the other reviews. But my narrative around the 10% failing rate is when we are testing against a compliance, very rigid framework, if we have a failing within that, that's where my 10% gets applied. For something of budget savings proposals, it is not as rigid. And what we would have been looking at, which is not contained within that narrative, is if there was a proposal put forward and that proposal was not met, it was not achieved, we would be looking at where was the visibility, what was any corrective action, a number of the other arrangements that would have been in place. There is a possibility that the reason that it hasn't been given an exception is because there were alternative savings that were proposed in another area because it was unachievable in this. There is more narrative within these particular areas, and I'm quite happy to share that detail. But the two scenarios are pretty different. One would be our general testing. And as I said, there's something very formal, very structured for us to assess it against. For something of that nature, it is more fluid, and there would be more narrative in here that I have not added into the report.
So Chair, I'm very happy with Elizabeth's reply. Of course, if we have a 90,000 departure from the budget, in terms of savings, that means, as you say, there must presumably be some mitigation with that saving being made somewhere else or additional revenue being generated to balance the books, so to speak. I know we're not told to use that phrase anymore, but effectively that's what we're seeking to do here. So if you've got the additional narrative, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Carry on, Chair.
Yes, how many are on your list? So I'm prepared.
Oh, not so many.
Not so.
It's not an exact science. So I also picked up on the same point that Vanessa did about expenses, but and I know that for many people reading this information, staff being what might be seen as rewarding staff for those activities might be of some concern. I suppose I probably do look upon it in a slightly different way, that our staff are an amazingly precious asset that we have, and it's part of the mechanism by which we congratulate and reward staff and recognize those achievements that they do. And in some cases, it could simply be an exercise of team building, which also has a value associated with it. The way I would probably react to that is that it's necessary for the council to explain those expenditures in those sort of terms, whereas on the surface, giving people vouchers might be seen in one light. If we were to explain a different context, it might be turned around, and rather than being seen as a giving away money to staff, but actually a positive contribution to the efficiency of the working of the council. So sometimes, and this general point I know I'm making here, but sometimes the way that we express our relationship with staff needs just to be reflected quite carefully, recognizing the benefit that they bring to us all, including every islander. So the other question I had was on page 133. I'll give people a moment to jump to that page. And including myself, I know it's quite a big jump. So on the page here, we had the section beginning with no assurance and limited assurances, but then on page 142 within that section,
I think we've moved to the second one of the Chief Internal Auditor's reports. So you haven't
So are we dealing with them
We were
individually?
doing
All right, I'll wait
one by one.
I'll wait for the
If you
second one
don't
to be
mind,
brought
yeah.
up then. I've got questions on each of the A, B and C, so I thought we were dealing with them all in one go.
No, I did ask at the start, and the chief and the internal auditor indicated she would do each in turn. So any more on that, the first of the chief and internal auditor's report, questions or comments on those? I actually think that was a very helpful contribution you made there, Councillor Jarman, about understanding the context of certain of those payments in terms of the value of our staff. All of us will have been in employment, I'm sure, at some point where we have had that, the value of our work recognised, I hope. And that may have been in some kind of an informal way, or a non-additive bonus. So where is the line drawn between something like that just says thank you and something that is quite perfectly proper to provide somebody with a bonus within a salary scheme? So, but at the same time, Councillor Churchman's quite right. From the outside, members of the public will ask, well, what exactly is that for? So I think it is all about the phrasing and framing of these sorts of things, subject, of course, ultimately to what statute limits. So also, I just comment, thank you to the directors for their comments. It will be really interesting in a forthcoming meeting to hear of the progress further made on those action plans, if we might have those at a due time, because I recognise some of those actions may take a little bit of time. Some of them will be easy to put in place. But colleagues, anything else? Otherwise, can we take it that I believe all we need to do is to note and receive this report? Otherwise, I think we have done so, and we can move to B of your reports. It was a good one.
Thank you. So item B is the annual opinion. So it is pulling together all of the work that has been undertaken across the year. Is also any investigation work and any other intelligence that we have from an internal audit perspective, any problems and issues. You would have noted from the progress report that there are 2 items of work that are outstanding that should come along in September. Neither of those 2 items unduly influences the annual opinion. We're looking for systemic issues and failings potentially, and that influences an annual opinion as perhaps being limited. However, the control environment that you have in operation at the council from our internal audit perspective is actually working reasonably effectively, with pockets and risk exposures that aren't systemic but are in various areas within the organisation, which would be expected. There is standard information that is included within this report to enable the internal audit section to comply with public sector internal audit standards, and that is at the latter stages where you have the quality assurance under section 17 or page 17, along with page 19, which is the public sector internal audit standard. So I have to bring to your attention if there's any gaps in our skills. And I also have to note and bring to your attention any key areas of concern. So nothing systemic, but it enables the internal audit team to give a reasonable assurance opinion on the effectiveness of this control framework within operation at the council. Beyond that, Chair, I am happy to answer any questions. Anything major always flows into the annual governance statement, which I know you have at a later stage at the committee today.
Thank you. Councillor John, I know you have questions.
Yes, unusually so. So just on page 142, in the underneath the chart, we have the totals, and I understand what the asterisk is trying to imply. My suggestion would be that the number in the box equals the total of the numbers above it, and that a narrative is then added to note the changes which have occurred in the year. I always like it when columns add up, just a personal thing. And I think most people, when they look at columns, would intrinsically look at that and perhaps not get as far as reading the asterisk or deciphering the text below, which is somewhat convoluted and does require some previous knowledge on it. So that's really an observation rather than specifically a question. But then if I go through to page 143, where we list them by directorate, we have the same issue here, that we've got 41 now. So we're currently, we've got another figure which is odd, but also an asterisk with an explanation underneath it. So my view here would be to follow that through and just make sure columns add up. And if there's a reason why something needs to be highlighted, highlight it separately than referring to a total that isn't actually a total. Just a kind observation.
Thank you. It does look like the second one does total up correctly, but there's an asterisk.
Yeah, with
adding
to be deciphered
adding to
underneath.
Yes. Colleagues, any other questions on this report? Otherwise, I'll ask myself to bring forward a question. So page 141, there's your comment that Chief Internal Auditor at 2.2 that there has been slight deterioration in the ability to close actions at the point of follow-up. Could you expand on what you think is leading to that, has led to that slight deterioration?
There is a pattern across the unitaries that we're involved in where agreed actions following an audit. So basically, if we perform a review and we note that there are some risk exposures, we will work with the service to what actions need to be put in place to mitigate the risk. Those actions then have an assigned individual and a time scale to which the action should be implemented. We come back and test at a later stage, usually the following year. And I think there is significant pressure across all services, and it's not necessarily at the forefront the audit actions that are outstanding. And so when we come along to do a follow-up review, we inevitably find that a number of them are closed, but maybe not all of them are closed. We have put in place now new arrangements to aid the organisation in having its own visibility and to upload their own evidence and information. And I think a lot of it stems to a capacity issue and a visibility issue. So the audit tracker should aid that. We also go along to DMTs, which we will increase on a quarterly basis to actually share with directorates those areas that are still outstanding. It is management's responsibility, but I think we can aid them have better visibility.
Ultimately, do you see though that all the actions do get finished up? It's just not at that point in time, do you think?
Little bit of a combination. I think that I can clearly say that there's probably some very small pockets of where the actions don't necessarily get fully implemented. But then we also have to be mindful that there are some actions that are implemented, but it doesn't resolve the risk exposure. And in which case we need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate whether the risk was truly the risk to begin with and what other actions need to be taken to make certain that the control environment is working effectively. So a little bit of a combination with both.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any questions, comments otherwise on this, the recommendations that we noted? So I'll take it that we have done so. In which case you're onto your item C.
Thank you, Chair. Very little to say in relation to item C, but there is a requirement to bring back to the committee any revisions within any of the policies. There are minor revisions in the policy that is presented to you today, so I'm not going to go through any details, but I will happily take questions.
Thank you, colleagues. And anything that, as Chief Internal Auditor has said, it's minor revisions. So any questions on this? Councillor Jarman.
Just one issue to bring up. I don't know how many will have seen it, but there was an open letter sent over the weekend to the Chief Executive raising a number of issues which I think have a bearing on this section specifically. They seem to focus very much on planning and probity and disclosure. It may well be, if you've not seen that, to have a look at those issues. They do raise a number of concerns, and I'm not saying whether they're true or false. I'm just saying that there should be some notice taken as to finding out if they are true or false. One of those mentioned, for example, was that there is no hospitality register kept by the planning department. So clearly, where we, whether it's officers or councillors, enjoy any form of hospitality, there are obligations which are placed on us. And I think it's a good thing that a register is kept and it's accurate. And I think that serves both ways to make sure that, you know, we are not only fair, but we are seen to be open and honest and fair in our proceedings.
Thank you. Other questions or comments on that? Any comments on what Councillor Jarman's just said? I'm sure it is something that senior officers will be digesting to see what is salient within that for the authority. I am aware of it, but I haven't digested its contents as yet. Otherwise, the recommendation before us is to note this policy. So I presume that we're content to do that. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to Ms Goodwin for leading us through those. We're now on to the council's risk profile. Who will, Ms Downer, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The council's risk profile comes to the Audit and Governance Committee whenever it meets. It also goes to the corporate management team on a monthly basis, sometimes as a full report, sometimes just as an appendices for noting. Following the March meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, there was a full review at the request of the committee of all the strategic risks within the register. You'll note, normally I italic the report for you so you can spot the changes. I think you'd be better to spot the non-changes in this particular one. There was a considerable amount of comprehensive updates which were presented. In addition, the chair of this committee also attended the July's corporate management team to observe how the risk profiles reviewed by the senior management team at that meeting. There are no specific items to draw your attention to, and there are no new risks this time either. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those from the committee.
Thank you. And just to formally place on record my thanks to the Chief Executive and her corporate management team for allowing me to observe them a second time. It was helpful to do so. It assures me that risk is at that level, is being taken seriously and is discussed appropriately. So and that was the purpose of this kind of regular observation. It also just informs me a bit more in terms of the drilling down side of things, of how directors and the chief executive are seeing these things. But colleagues, questions on the risk profile? Councillor Jarman.
I know my colleagues are eager to jump in, so I thought I'd get in there quickly. If I, page 174, item 16. I'll share a concern here. The concern is that simply because of an accident at the timing of meetings, the strategic risk register for the first quarter, it says here, cannot be presented to Audit and Governance Committee until after they've been presented to Cabinet. That raises an issue that they could have been presented to Cabinet. That opportunity has been there, but it was not done. And as a result, they're not presented to this committee. And there is not another meeting of this committee for quite some time, by which those issues will be considerably out of date. So I would like to suggest, Chair, with respect, that that information should be disclosed now to the committee and should not have to wait until after another cabinet meeting is scheduled and it's put on that agenda. Otherwise, the scheduling of items on a cabinet agenda could be used, not saying it has been, but it could be used to ensure that items are not flagged or released to this committee. And I'll make that suggestion.
So certainly that, I think that would be helpful. Our next meeting is not until towards the end of September. There is another cabinet, of course, before that. But you make points actually that also, and we will be discussing the future governance paper later, but some of these things are more broad, running through into how we draft the constitution that will be in place for 2025 onwards as well. So it's not just doing that. Now
I'll make that a formal proposal, Chair, because I understand.
No, but I'm noting that there are other places in which we will need to look at those sorts of things as well. But Councillor Quirk, yes.
We've had quite a few ongoing issues of transparency. We seem to have had quite a few issues of transparency over the last year or more. And I think that that is actually important, that the principles of transparency are actually supported. And whilst we've only got another 9 months of the current, less than that, of the current cabinet system, I think actually flagging this as a formal issue is actually appropriate, because actually you wouldn't want figures to be withheld, even if it was a committee system in the future. You still wouldn't want figures to be withheld from audit because the committee system hadn't put it on their agenda. So I think the principle is actually correct, that we should be looking for openness and information coming to the audit committee in a timely fashion.
I probably the point I was making earlier as well, I think. But yeah, so your formal proposal though, Councillor Jarman, is that
my formal proposal is that information should be released to this committee now without delay, not awaiting the next meeting of this committee and not dependent on any other committee or cabinet meeting to discuss it.
I'll second that.
and that is duly seconded. Does any officer, before we take a vote on that, just want to comment as to any restriction on that? No, in which case we can. So, Councillor Church.
Just to say, Chair, I've said it before, governments have no money, councils have no money. They exist on what we as taxpayers pay. So the 142,000 population of the Isle of Wight should be able to look at everything that their money is being spent on. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, sorry, just for clarity, this is the risk attached to the budget. It's not the actual full budget account that you'd get in this, just to be clear. Yeah.
Before we deal with any resolutions, any other questions or comments on this paper? And then we'll obviously, Councillor Jarman will return to that motion. Councillor Quirk.
The fact that it's not the accounting department, that it's a political decision to stop information being shared, makes it worse.
Any other comments or questions around the risk register as it is? So one thing I just would like to pick up on is, and it is something actually I raised in when I was observing CMT, is around the staff capacity side of things. I think all of us as members are acutely aware of just how hard our staff are having to work at the moment. And there are certain areas of significant under-resourcing. And that was page 180. 181 was a reference particularly to mental health, and then thereafter to the mental health champions. How effective do we feel that the council is at the moment in assisting people in managing their mental health as in the way that it is? Ms. Gordian, that's great, thank you.
I wonder, Chairman, if I may respond to that, as I'm conscious that my directorate is the largest employer within the council, so probably the area where most staff come into contact. We've recently had the annual wellbeing event at the council, and I regularly receive feedback from my teams around the offer that we have in place. As you would expect with every local authority, we do tend to have a one size fits all solution, and that needs adapting to meet the needs of individuals on occasion. Certainly within my directorate, I've found that the council makes available to all of my staff the support that they need to be able to manage their work-life balance, but also to preserve their mental health in the activities that they undertake. If I may give you a real life example, it's not unusual for my direct care delivery staff to encounter people who've unfortunately passed away in their own home when they've been receiving care and support, and in between calls have died. That's always something that's incredibly jarring for anyone in any circumstance, let alone for a care worker who's going into the home to see that person having seen them only a few hours earlier. In those situations, the council not only makes available immediate support through line management, but also longer term support to help those members of staff adjust to what they've seen and to protect their mental well-being. I remain wholly satisfied with the mental health support that's available to my services, but that's added to further by the mental health champions. Within my service area, there are a number of mental health champions who support not only adult social care and housing, but also more widely across the council. And that peer support, the opportunity to work alongside somebody who's in a similar situation to you, or who may have had very similar experiences, is incredibly powerful for our workforce. I feel compelled to say it's not the answer for everybody, nor does it provide the solution that everybody would wish to see in place based on their personal circumstances. But from a director's point of view, I believe that the offer put in place for our staff is one that is exceptional to preserve their mental health and to support them in maintaining a healthy mental outlook on their work-life balance.
Thank you for that. That's reassuring. And as somebody who about a decade ago was actually in that situation of having very poor mental health, one of the things I think, albeit in a situation where privately employed, the importance of enabling people to feel comfortable in recognizing they're having problems with their mental health, and coming forward and seeking help at the earliest possible stage. And so I just want to reinforce what I think Ms. Golding is laying out, that this authority is proactive and very supportive of those who believe that their mental health is being affected in some way, and that they come forward and seek the internal support, and then indeed any professional medical support that they should need. I'd speak very much from the heart on that. So I'm glad to hear what the Directorate has just said. On page 184, there's a reference to safety valve again, and I know Councillor Churchman, I believe you've raised this as well. Given that there is a new government, is there any indication, obviously very early days yet, in terms of how that might be playing out, the safety valve approach? Have they given any indication on what they're doing in that direction?
No, not yet. But what they have done is they have made it clear that the range of challenges that exist within the system supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities and their families right across the country is a priority to look at. And there has been quite a few statements coming out actually from the new government relating to that. And there's an acknowledgement that there is change needed. Members might be interested to Google a piece of research which was published last week, which had been commissioned by the Local Government Association all around special educational needs and disabilities, which proposes a 5-year programme of change around the special educational needs system, relating to both improvements in quality of provision, but also around financial solutions.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll return to Councillor Jarman's motion. If there aren't, then it has been proposed and seconded. So, oh, did you wish to comment, Councillor?
I've just got a comment on, or ask page 184, we talk about this safety valve. I still haven't got my head around that, but you've noted in the column the pressures around driving and delivering the complex, underlined, safety valve program need careful management. I mean, how much time is this taking away from other things, please?
So the work that is part of delivering the safety valve agreement is work that we would want to be doing anyway. If you go through the safety valve agreement, which was agreed in March 2023, it relates to things like improving the quality of special educational needs and disabilities support in mainstream schools. It talks about developing vocational pathways for young people as they prepare for adulthood, to make sure that there's appropriate support in place for them to move into meaningful employment. Things like supported internships, supported apprenticeships. So those actions within there are things we would want to do anyway. So it is a very significant piece of work, and there's a very significant amount of work we need to do to improve the provision of special educational needs and disabilities provision on the island. But there's nothing in there that we wouldn't want to do anyway, whether we had the safety valve agreement or not. It's also true to say, and this is something we were discussing when I met with the official parent carer forum for that works with families on the island who have children with additional needs. I made this point with them last week, that actually the highest quality system for providing special education needs and disability support is also the best value for money. Because if you can identify need early and intervene early with the right support, which means that you have to have school colleagues, for example, who are equipped to identify those needs and support those needs, and we need the range of support with health colleagues as well. If those needs can be identified and supported early, they won't escalate. And that is actually in the best interest of the child and the young person, but it's also in the best interest of the public purse as well. Because if they do escalate, then they become much more expensive to support. And that actually is at the crux of this report I mentioned just now, that the LGA has commissioned and has been produced by the ISOS partnership. It's about early identification. It's about early provision of support. And right at the crux of that is the quality of provision in mainstream schools. And the more we can do to improve the quality of education in our mainstream schools, the better we will be able to meet those needs of children with additional needs, and the lower spend we will have in order to do that, which is why the whole thing is linked into the emerging education strategy that we've published, the draft education strategy we published a couple of weeks ago, which is open for feedback until the end of this calendar year, which of the 5 pillars in there, one of them is special educational needs and disabilities.
I'll come back. I have experience. I had a son who is still totally dyslexic with early learning difficulties. So I've come up the hard route. What worries me is, by concentrating so much of effort for SEN children inside schools, are we then hindering the rest of the class, for example? Does it mean that teachers are having to concentrate so much on the children who can't cope so well, so that the clever children, if we're not careful, get left by the wayside? Is there now a time where we should, we're talking about now closing primary schools, is there now a time where we should set up one school, one building somewhere which deals with SEN children? My son went to a school like that in Croydon, and it was fabulous. And it really did work, because to me, trying to combine a teacher's time, a teacher's not a social worker, but we are turning our teachers into part social workers because they're trying to cope with 2 types of educational level. And it really does concern me. Thank you.
if you could answer that, but I'm aware we're probably straying now into the areas which are properly for the scrutiny committee side of things, but it has been asked as a question, so if you can.
Thanks, Councillor, for your interest in this very important topic. So I think we do have the model that you're outlining, because we do have special schools on the island, we do have specialist resource provisions on the island, and we do have mainstream schools. So we do have that mixed model. We will always have that mixed model, I think, because there will always be some children, young people who do need a specialist placement for their needs to be met. However, I would also suggest that the improved practices that we are working with our colleagues in schools to develop will benefit not only those with special educational needs, but also those children who do not have special educational needs. So I think by doing what we're doing, all children will benefit. And the education strategy is about improving education outcomes for all children, not just those with special educational needs.
Thank you for that. And certainly something I would hope the scrutiny side of our council would get into, along with just Cabinet's general role in policy development. If I can return us now, we have a motion that was proposed by Councillor Jarman, up duly seconded. So do you want to just reiterate what that is, just to make sure we're absolutely cognizant of what we're voting on? That's a, yeah. Do you have that? Yeah, just.
So is that the Q1 financial risk updates within the strategic profile be released to members of the Audit and Governance Committee without further delay, not awaiting the next meeting of the committee and not dependent on any other committee or cabinet meeting to discuss it?
Thank you. Those in favour of that, please show. I will. Well, that is unanimous. Thank you. And then we do have another formal recommendation that we do approve the risk, the strategic risks as set out in Appendix 1. I'll move that from the chair. Are we content to approve those risks? Please show if you are. Lovely, thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Downer, as always, for your work on that, and indeed, well, the chief executive and whose name it is. So we are now on to item 9, which is the annual governance statement (brackets draft). Who is introducing that? It is you again, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think all members of the committee have probably seen this one before. It is an annual governance statement. It's something that all local authorities are requested to do. The draft annual governance statement and the related committee report and appendices is presented to you. It would normally be approved and alongside the final accounts being signed off, but I'm aware those aren't available at the moment, so it may be a defer. The annual governance statement is a statutory document which explains the processes and procedures in place to enable the council to conduct its functions effectively. And the statement is produced following a review of the council's governance arrangements and includes an action plan at the end that addresses any significant governance issues that are identified. And those are what you will have seen previously referred to in our internal audit assurance. So following our meetings with the internal audit, I'm pleased to say that we've retained the reasonable assurance level, which obviously you will have seen in item 7B. And there is a requirement to continue to monitor the anti-fraud controls, again, as highlighted, to ensure that compliance and improvement of this item. So that has been added to the pack in terms of the action plan, which sits at page 231 and onwards. Again, I don't think there's anything else to raise for you in relation to the governance statement. Just happy to take any questions should you have any.
Questions, comments, colleagues? Councillor Jarman.
I only have one issue, and it's a bit of a bugbear with me. I know I raised it at full council as well, under the equality and diversity issue that we have here. My belief is that according to that 2010 legislation, we should not be introducing council policies that discriminate on the basis of sex. And yet the other day at full council, we had a paper before us, a policy statement, which did exactly that. So I'll highlight that as I did at the full council meeting. And I'm mindful of this section 18 because we specifically reference the Equality Act 2010 here. And we do note the protected characteristics, which include on the penultimate line, that issue of sex. So I do not believe, even though that was passed at full council, that this council should be introducing any policy whatsoever that discriminates on the basis of sex or any of the other protected characteristics, just to generalize that statement a little. So my concern about the statement we're doing here is that we're basically adhering to, saying that we adhere to this act and yet passing a policy which is at variance with it. So a concern, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And certainly society is becoming much more aware of the protected characteristics, indeed the characteristics of all of this. I did some research myself. That phraseology is a lift directly from an Act of Parliament. So I would guess in law, of course, judges would consider the extent to which the 2010 Act overrides any statement within the 2009 Act. Notwithstanding that, unless there's otherwise a statutory requirement for us to reflect the Act exactly as it's phrased, which may be one of the difficulties, you may be aware that all Acts of Parliament still are written as though the male pronoun is supreme. There is no gender neutrality within Acts of Parliament, which is shameful in my view. We could achieve that at the parliamentary level, but I think what you raised at full council was very important, and what you've raised again, and I'm sure officers have taken that on board to ensure wherever legally possible, and we should be always, we are using language which is non-discriminatory, and other than where it is legally allowable for us to be discriminatory. And the 2010 Act does allow for discrimination on reasonable grounds. So, other than that really important point, anything else to add on the governance statement? No, certainly when reading it through, I felt it did reflect accurately what we aspire to do within this council. I'm sure there'll be political debate as to the extent to which we deliver to those aspirations, but that is, dare I say, for another time, and albeit probably in this very room, but in a different collection of people. But otherwise, can we agree to the recommendation there that we confirm it as the final version for publication? I'll propose that from the chair. And those in favour of doing so, if you could please show. Or were you indicating Councillor Burke first to speak on this, or?
Just going to move it, yeah.
Oh, right. So I was just taking votes for that recommendation. Was that agreed? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Where are we now? Almost 12. I am aware that Mr. Souter and Mr. Jones may need to leave us at 12:30 if we are still going, because they have to travel back to another place. So we're on to item 10, which is the procurement half-yearly report. Which officer is speaking? Mr. Thorne.
Chairman, apologies, our procurement team lead is currently absent, so I'll give a very brief introduction and then take questions and field them as best as I can. Councillors, it's routine reporting that comes before you, providing a high-level summary of the council's activity for the period 1st of October 23 to 31st of March this year, quarters 3 and 4, summarising the contracts that have been awarded, the waivers of our CSOs, and a summary of the strategy actions. Councillors are asked to note the report, but obviously happy to field questions and try and answer them now, or if not, ensure an answer is provided. Thank you, Chair.
Colleagues, questions or comments on this? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I understand that the council have just replaced their electric car fleet. I haven't seen anywhere the cost, but have all the factors been taken into account with electric cars? The fact that if anything goes wrong electrically with a car, it's usually a scrap item. If anybody has an accident in an electric car, it is a very expensive vehicle to replace. And we talk about eco-friendly. what happened or happens to all the cars that we have replaced? Thank you.
Ms Betts.
So thank you for asking the question. It was interesting because I've just had a meeting with Kieran Tarrant, who is our fleet manager, and we've discussed some of those things. So with regard to the fleet replacement, we have a programme to replace our traditional vehicles, petrol and diesel, with electric cars. We accept they are more expensive, hence, you know, you will have seen from the accounts, the capital bids have increased substantially to be able to fund us for that. So I think we're up to about 40% on replacement of our fleet vehicles with electric vehicles. We appreciate that if there is an accident, that the replacement costs are higher, and hence we are working very, very carefully to ensure that the risk of accidents is actually minimised. So we are monitoring our drivers very, very carefully. We get tracker reports on a weekly basis to understand how fast they're driving, whether there's any speeding within their visits, etc. We have a council vehicle driving authorisation where we're checking people's licence to make sure that they are whether they have points on their licence or not, etc., etc. And if there are accidents, issues, that there is now a driving assessment that we ensure that those individuals are taken through, and we assess them on their driving capability. So hopefully that's given you some comfort that we are working on the things that you've raised.
May I come back? Just one other question as regards insurance. I know my insurance went up last year, although I have a no claims bonus. And when I queried it, I don't have an electric car. I was told that all car insurance has gone up because of the cost of replacing or repairing electric cars. So what is the cost to the council as regards insurance? Because again, this is all taxpayers' money. Thank you, Chair.
My understanding on the insurance arrangements, and I think I agree with you, I think everybody's car insurance has gone up to facilitate greater the incidence of accidents and potential increased costs for replacement of electric cars. But my understanding is if there is an accident, then the service area will have to fund the first £1,000 of any repairs, and thereafter there is a call on the insurance fund. But having said that, it's one of our audit actions, thank you audit colleagues, that we are actually tracking the cost of claims made for electric vehicles, so we can understand that and forecast that better.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this procurement paper? Councillor Drummond.
Just one, which I was asked by a resident actually to bring forward, which I will. So I was asked specifically on the procurements that have been done to note two things. One is the figures we've got here are for the first quarter of the year. So I don't know why we haven't got the second figures yet. I would imagine figures up to the end of June would be April, May, June would be readily available, given that the system is increasingly computerized. So there's one of timeliness, and that I think that came up earlier, one of the other papers that were brought. And then secondly, to find out what is the expense of the A3055 in terms of the mitigation and examination measures. The only one I found so far was on page 252. Perhaps somebody can advise me if there are other items. It's the first item on page 252.
Chair, to the first question, that it's just the reporting cycle that well, I've inherited and that we've been working on. We did slightly tweak. I appreciate that we probably do have the figures, but we've also got our report our reporting cycle where we have to produce the report, get it through our internal governance processes, and that itself takes time. So there isn't much time between the end of the reporting periods that we're reporting on and producing the report to be able to produce the most up-to-date figures. We will be reporting those in the next 6-month report that will come before the committee. In relation to the second question, I'm not sure the procurement team have visibility on that at the moment. And that could be because it's been worked up within the directorate at the moment. I'm not sure.
Could I ask then that an up-to-date record of those costs and procurements are provided sometime in the, and they can just be pulled from the procurement system sometime in the next week, just to provide an interim update? Or I'm sure Tasha Dix would know it off the top of her head, but she's not here. So if we could ask that to be sent through, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Chair, just for clarity, so is that in up-to-date figures in relation to the particular issue of the A3055?
Is that going to be achievable? Yes.
Chairman, we don't hold the figures, so what I can do is endeavour to make inquiries.
Well, I'm sure it is. Any other questions on this paper? Otherwise, I think it's for noting, is it not? In which case, I'll take it that we have noted. Oh, Councillor Quirk, yeah, just indicating you're noting. That's it. Thank you. So we'll take that as noted. Thank you. Which brings us to item 11, Property Investment Portfolio Annual Report, page 271 onwards. Who has got 271 on?
Sorry, that's myself, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
So just to say that this is a routine report which comes to the committee on an annual basis and provides an update on the performance of the council's commercial portfolio. And as detailed in the executive summary, the property investment is performing well. So in essence, we have no vacant units, the fund has increased, and the current value of the portfolio has increased by just over £1 million within the year. So all looking good at this moment in time. So I'd like any questions?
Questions? Colleagues? No, that's just an arm sort of up. Yes. Councillor Jarman.
So it's good that the capital value is increasing. That's a good bonus. The net yield on the property is at 2. I haven't got the page. 2.79, I believe. % as a return on investment. Yeah. Which is, had it not been for the capital appreciation value, which has been very successful, that yield would be quite below expectations, I think. It's a question of how we incorporate that capital gain and at what point that capital value can be reflected. I'm looking to my left somewhat here. It did come up earlier in the audit discussion about the value of the assets held.
So we audit the value of the assets as presented in the annual accounts, which I'm assuming will be the capital value that's summarised here. In terms of a net yield, that's not specifically something we actually look at because that's a separate report. It's inferred out the same numbers, but we don't specifically actually look at it. So we concentrate on the value in the balance sheet as at the 31st of March.
Thank you. It does, Chair. The asset value, of course, is almost a bookkeeping exercise. It's good that it's captured there, but it's not something which becomes real until it's realised. And presumably that accrues on the books as well, does it? Sharon?
I believe so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this report? Otherwise, again, it is for noting. Yes, for noting. So, colleagues, shall we take it that? Can I take it that it is noted? Thank you very much. And that moves us to item 12, which is the future governance
update. Is this with you again, Ms. Betts? Or is it going to be with Claire on the other side of your things? Hi, can you hear us? Are you hearing us okay?
Indeed, I can indeed now. The sound at the beginning of the meeting was not brilliant, but yes, indeed, I can hear you now. Do you want me to introduce the report, Chairman?
If you briefly could, because it is obviously being led in terms of the working up of everything from an officer point of view, but I'll make comment as well as chair.
Okay, thank you. So as the committee will be aware, full council made its resolution to move towards a committee system with effect from May next year, 2025. So to assist in the process, Audit and Governance have obviously been charged with the oversight of the preparations and delivery of that outcome. So the report provides committee members with an update on where we've got to thus far in terms of those preparations, and seeks your approval of the planning documents that have been prepared that sets out all the various arrangements for taking this forward. And in particular, drawing committee members' attention to Appendix 1, the project initiation document, which is a rather lengthy but important document in terms of making sure that we have set out what the project needs to achieve, and in particular what's within scope and what's out of scope, the outcomes and the outputs that need to be delivered, and the workstream activities necessary to deliver them, and of course all of the required arrangements for delivery. And so we're obviously seeking committee's views and input on that document to make sure that we have covered as far as we possibly can the key elements that need to be included. Appendix 2 sets out a very high level plan which includes obviously the key dates that we consider necessary for delivery of some of those activities. So I'll leave it with you, Chair, to take anything by way of comment, and I'll happily try and answer any queries you may have.
Thank you for that. And in terms of my involvement so far as Chair beyond this meeting, is you'll see from the project specification documents that I am representative on the project board. We've had one meeting where these documents were discussed. We also had an informal meeting. I think Councillor Jarman, you were there, were you not? Am I forgetting any other colleague who was there at that informal meeting? Do remind me. But we went through this at some length to ensure that we felt informally that it was covering all of the right things. So I think it's had two passes now to make sure that everything very important is in those documents. I'm acutely aware that even though we gave ourselves another year as a full council to allow this to be delivered, it is a big piece of work. We were ready. That was one question we were very clear to be sure on, that we were ready in May 24 if full council so chose, but full council did choose to move to go for a May 25 side of things. But in terms of the documents in front of you, we do have to sort of resolve to consider whether or not these are good and proper for us. Are there comments or questions on these documents at this stage? Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. I do believe that whilst the officer side of the equation seems to be progressing very well, that we need to move forward with the member side of this equation without delay. And I appreciate that it's difficult to get people around the table, as it was on the working group often, but we haven't had a working group meeting formally for some time. And I think that level of progress on the officer side needs to be reciprocated on the councillor side. So perhaps we could ask you, as the vice chair of the working group, I believe, Are you deputy for Jeff? No? No,
It's basically Jeff, isn't it?
it's Jeff, but were you not the deputy? You stepped
No,
in.
I de facto maybe at times, but not. But that group has now stood down,
Yeah.
of course. We're now into the project board side of things, but new arrangements to make sure that all members are engaged is something we should.
And I think that should be done with some urgency because time flies.
Yeah,
So,
and that is why
no latter.
paragraph 6 has this, that
Yeah.
members agree to hold meetings of the committee members. So it's now formally charged to us as audit and governance to from the member lead. That doesn't exclude every other member as well. And I think there were discussions around ensuring group leaders take their responsibilities to drill things down, and to those who are non-aligned, particularly Councillor Brodie, who's spearheaded all of this to make sure we're all engaged, which possibly does mean we need to be looking at something perhaps in later August to come together in some way or another to help move things forwards, and on the timetabled approach. But you're quite right, Councillor Jarman. We as members have to step up to this as much as, because our officers are a few paces along the way already. So yes, I agree with you.
So Chair, would it be satisfactory to ask you to have a conversation with Councillor Brodie about how and when that next meeting can be organised and under what structure, as noted here, and to kick off a series of meetings and define the dates so that people can start to put them in the diary? I don't want to burden you terribly.
No, you would not.
Sorry, I referred to you as the deputy, but you play an important role here.
But my understanding is now that Future Governance Working Group is now stood down. Yeah. And it's now formally with us as the formal committee with charge for governance. It's engaging and consulting with all members of the council, but the Future Governance Working Group is not the body. That is not now in place. The full council process is that it's this committee. Am I right? I'm sure.
That's absolutely spot on, Chairman. Yes, absolutely. So the previous Future Governance Group is no longer in existence. That was closed down. That was considered to be the phase 1 part of the work. And so this is the initiation of the phase 2, which is the implementation. As you rightly say, Audit and Governance Committee have been charged with the oversight of the delivery of that work. And they will indeed, in terms of one of the work streams, which is set out in the project initiation document at Appendix 1, sets out the need for us to have key points of engagement in terms of the wider councillor interface. So there will be opportunities built in as part of that work to engage with the wider membership. And indeed, of course, you will also be making recommendations to full council for all members to consider the work that has been prepared in readiness.
Well, I would emphasise, although this committee is the one with the formal responsibilities now, it is very, very important that we ensure through this committee that every member of the council is engaged in this process and find ways to do that as early as is necessary and as frequently as is necessary and possible. So so hopefully that satisfies you on that, Councillor Jarman. We are now into a phase 2 side of things.
Yeah. So my emphasis was, can we start having those meetings and putting them in dates in diaries? And I assume you will be chairing that, or perhaps that's a presumption.
So in terms of our informal meetings, yes,
Yeah.
I would indeed.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
So,
and I think that was recognised at our last informal meeting. That there was a small matter of the updates offered to me were not dates I could do, and so we're just trying to liaise my diary with others. But I'm acutely aware, as an avid supporter of the committee system, albeit one that ultimately went with 2025 rather than 2024. That we move this ahead. So that's a long way of saying yes, Councillor Jarman, I hope.
I'll take the yes, Chair.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Chair, may I
Councillor
say,
Churchman.
you're not thinking of holding something in August, are you?
Um,
I mean, it is
It is
holiday
a
month.
holiday period. I'm acutely aware that it is so.
I mean,
what I will
you've
liaise
got
with officers to see
people-
what they need from us at this stage as well. But I'm also aware that at the start of September I shall be away on holiday. That's the way my holiday cycle works. So it will be as soon as is practicable, and certainly before our next formal meeting of this committee. If that's as helpful as I can be on that at the moment.
If I could remind people, I think I'm correct in saying it's the children's school holidays will only be a 5-week length, because we've now gone to 2 weeks in October. So in fact, the children will be going back to school something like, I would have thought, the 1st or 2nd of September anyway, which means everybody will be back in workplace positions. Just a thought. Thank you.
For most schools, although there is a pattern of holidays across the island, depending upon which schedule they're following, all the academies follow and the private schools follow the same as some of the ones which follow the LEA holiday schedule. But you're quite right, and I'm also acutely aware August is a time when officers themselves, quite rightly, get some time off as well. So we'll attempt to get something that works for everybody, and it probably won't work for anybody. But I now have a vice chair, so if nothing else, I can always drop out, and the vice chair can pick up for me if I'm not available. I don't want that to stall any of this work. We do have 3 recommendations formally before us, colleagues. If we're happy to, can I move those recommendations from the chair? So that. Thank you very much, Councillor Churchman. And if there is no other comments or questions, I'll take a vote on those 3 recommendations. Those in favour, please show. I'm assuming Councillor Churchman is indicating in favour as well. Thank you. That's unanimous. And thank you to the Claire and all the officers involved in this, in bringing this forward. It is enormously appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then item 13 is I'm hearing noises off. Is it just noises off outside? I think so. Yeah. Oh, okay. It's that part of the meeting where you start hearing things, isn't it? So item 13 is a standing item where we report back anything which, in the general sense of reviewing of the Constitution, obviously the future governance group, which we have just been discussing, is looking at the 2025 Constitution. That doesn't mean that we can't be looking at our current Constitution as it is. I attended the meeting of Policy and Scrutiny for Neighbourhoods on Thursday because they were having a quite a lengthy discussion around the whole planning department side of things. And I emphasised to them, in my role as chair of this committee, that if anything that's they require in the way of constitutional change, which did arise from consideration of the planning peer review, that they should expedite it to this committee so that we could consider it and report it on and recommend and on to full council as soon as possible. So that was acknowledged, but at the moment I've had no communication out of them that they want anything changed in the Constitution. There did seem to be a general feeling that the Constitution was robust in parts around planning, but and of course this item, hopefully we will see other matters coming forward. So that's my verbal update at this point, and I'm sure there'll be a flurry of things that might emerge anyway from the future governance side of things that we can fix in terms of our budget for the remaining 9 months that we have, as much as for the 2025 side of things. So following on from that, colleagues, item 14 would be the work plan. You have that before you, and just consider and note that our work plan. Any comments on that otherwise? And then item 15 is members' question time. Any questions from members? In which case I will close the meeting by that clock at 12:19. Thank you all for your attendance and contributions today, particularly gold star goes to Councillor Jarman for some very searching questions indeed, but to all of my colleagues and all of the officer corps. Hopefully our visitors from Coburg have found some of that fascinating, maybe some of it mysterious. But overall, hopefully you've just enjoyed being able to observe what we've been doing today, and I've hopefully enjoyed the rest of your time here on the Isle of Wight, and safe journey back to Coburg when that happens. Thank you.